Hi guys, YGOSmurf here, and today we're talking about a card called Magical Spring. Videos by YGOSmurf. Be creative. Magical Spring is a quick play spell card whose effect states, draw a number of cards equal to the number of face-up spell or trap cards that your opponent controls. Then discard a number of cards equal to the number of face-up spell or trap cards you control. Until the end of your opponent's next turn after this card resolves, spell and trap cards your opponent controls cannot be destroyed by battle or a card effect. Also, their activation and effects cannot be negated. You can only activate one Magical Spring per turn. This card I honestly hadn't heard anything about until I pulled it in a pack. And, I thought to myself, wow, this is a really neat card, and it could definitely do some things in the current format, or rather in the current game state, because it has to do with face-up spell or trap cards. Guess what count as face-up spell cards? Pendulum monsters within the pendulum zone. Right there, if your opponent already has a completed pendulum scale, you activate this card, your opponent has two face-up spell or trap cards, you get to draw two. Now, unfortunately, because of how card interactions work, this card will technically be face-up on the field when you activate it, so then you will always have to discard one card regardless of how many spell or trap cards your opponent controls. Like I said, I hadn't really heard any hype or buzz about this card, and I felt like bringing it to my viewers' attention that this is a really good card. Right now, it is around the $5 mark, as like when I checked it a week ago, and I think it could be very strong going later into the game when things like Cleaforts, even this card would have been really nice because Cleaforts like to have their completed pendulum scale, so that's two face-up spell or trap cards. Plus, they would normally have a continuous trap card or another continuous spell, whether that be an equipped spell or some sort of floodgate that the Cleaforts really like. And that would mean you're drawing 4 cards and discarding 1, which sets you up to be really good. And I potentially see this being really good in the Dino Mist matchup, as well as the Peep matchup, depending on how that deck is played later within the format with the additional TCG banless additions. Those decks specifically because Performapal 1, not only does it normally always have a pendulum scale, but it also relies on destroying their pendulum scale to add more cards. So Magical Springs would stop the destruction of their own cards, as well as netting you some advantage. For the Dino Mist are going to want to have a completed pendulum scale, plus always having their field spell card on there, so that's 3 face-up spell cards right there that you can then capitalize off of with Magical Spring to get you the cards that you need. I would like to point out that this card is definitely not for every deck or for every matchup, so it's not going to be very helpful in any pendulum-based strategy, just because you're going to want to have your own pendulum monsters on your scale, and then that instantly mitigates anything that you draw, and you could potentially be discarding more cards than you drew, which is kind of scary and not at all what we want. Also, not that this deck is relevant anymore, but Fire Fist, you wouldn't want to run Magical Spring in because of the need for the continuous spells and traps that Fire Fist work off of, which are the Tanky and a couple others. Another thing to kind of think about with Magical Spring is that in the basic strategy, if you're not running pendulums or mini continuous spell cards, that it is a good filler or thinner for your deck for game 1, and then once you figure out what your opponent is doing, instead of trying to add consistency to your deck, you can then directly inhibit through side decking out Magical Spring for a specific floodgate or a specific counter to whatever matchup you're against. So this card is the ideal main deck to side deck card. I am definitely going to be trying out Magical Spring in some of my decks. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below. Give me a thumbs up, so that way I know you guys want to see more not so popular tech videos. Subscribe to me if you deem me worthy. Have a wonderful day, guys. See ya.